Asylums, chemical weapons plants, a doll factory, all these buildings have two things in common. They're all abandoned, and the history behind them is dark. An abandoned hospital, creepy. An abandoned hospital in Germany that was used in both world wars, extra creepy. Beelitz Heilstätten Hospital, about 30 miles outside of Berlin, is an enormous complex. It was built in 1898 by the Berlin Workers' Health Insurance Corporation. It started out housing tuberculosis patients. This was a time when tuberculosis was a real problem, a leading cause of death. So the 60-building facility was designed to give patients the best possible care with fresh air and rest. During World War I, the hospital transformed into a military hospital for the Imperial German Army, and in late 1916, a young Adolf was even treated here after he was wounded in the Battle of the Somme. You wanted abandoned buildings with evil histories? Doesn't get much more evil than that guy. The hospital was also used in World War II as a field hospital for wounded German soldiers. After the war, though, the Soviets took control of the hospital and it became a Soviet military hospital. One of the most well-known patients during the Soviet era was Erich Honecker, the last leader of East Germany. He was treated for liver cancer there in the early 90s. Now today there are parts of Beelitz Heilstätten that are still used, mostly for neurological rehabilitation and Parkinson's research, but most of the buildings are abandoned. If you can't tell by, looking at these images, crumbling walls, peeling paint, rusted hospital equipment left behind, it's pretty nightmarish. Even if you are 100% staunchly, just do not believe in the paranormal, I'm sure you'd still get the creeps wandering around this place. Next is another abandoned hospital, this one with an even darker history though. It was an asylum. Athens Lunatic Asylum in Ohio, often referred to simply as the Ridges. The asylum opened in 1874, and the first patient, a young girl with epilepsy who'd been locked away by her parents because they believed she was possessed by a demon. Quite a start. Now, before it closed in 1993, it housed a variety of patients, including Civil War vets, rebellious young people, homeless people, the elderly, and even violent criminals. As the number of patients increased, so did the number of buildings. By the time it was abandoned, there were 78 buildings on the property. There are also 3 cemeteries on the grounds. The main building was supposed to house up to maybe 570 something patients, but at its peak, the asylum treated over 2,000. That is some severe overcrowding. This, combined with medical staff who often lacked experience, made for a pretty awful environment. Lobotomies, hydrotherapy, and electric shock therapy were common treatments, and you could land yourself here for a wide range of reasons. Menopause, menstruation issues, drinking too much, epilepsy, even asthma. You could even end up in this place for having a little too much fun with yourself in the pants area. So I would not be in this place at all. And once you were admitted, all contact with family would be cut off, which would probably be a good thing if you were in here for the latter reason. A lot of the nearly 1,700 people who died at the asylum were buried on the premises, with only a number marking their graves. But Ohio locals all know about the story of Margaret Schilling. Margaret was a patient who went missing on December 1st, 1978. 42 days later, her decomposing body was found in a rarely used area of Building 20. Her body had left a permanent stain on the concrete floor, which is still visible to this day. Yeah, that's just icky. Here's something a little different, an abandoned chemical weapons plant. Okunoshima Island off the coast of Japan has a pretty pleasant reputation these days. There are tons of rabbits that live there. So many, in fact, that the place is often referred to as Rabbit Island. But there's a darker side to this place. The island was also home to a top-secret chemical weapons plant. The Japanese government chose this remote location to produce mustard gas from 1927 to 1945. Over 6,000 tons of mustard gas was manufactured on the island. The chemical weapons plant was part of a highly classified operation, and its existence was so secretive that the island was actually removed from maps. The workers at the plant were exposed to harmful chemicals, leading to severe health issues and, in some cases, death. At the end of World War II, to cover up the activities that took place, the Japanese military destroyed all records related to the chemical weapons production. Now, today, the abandoned plant is still standing, but visitors are not allowed inside because there's still a risk of contamination. In 1988, the Japanese government finally acknowledged the island's dark history and opened the Okunoshima poison gas museum. St. Gerard's Hospital in Warwickshire has been abandoned since 1988. In its early days, it was used as a hospital to treat young patients, many of whom were orphans, and later on it was used to treat soldiers during World War II. So it's safe to assume this place has some lingering spirits left behind, if you believe in that sort of thing anyway. Even if you don't though, you can't deny how eerie the place looks. The place dates back to the early 20th century. It was originally built as a hospital for a boys' home. A lot of the patients coming from the home were in poor health due to their backgrounds, and there was a clear need for dedicated medical care. So the Birmingham Diocesan Rescue Society for the Protection of Homeless and Friendless Catholic Children was established, and St. Gerard's Hospital opened its doors in 1913. Imagine just being referred to as friendless, you know? You're already poor, you're already sick, and now they just assume you don't have friends? I don't know, that's kind of mean. But anyway, during World War I, it was used to care for wounded soldiers, and after the war, the hospital shifted its focus to treating tuberculosis. Do dolls creep you out? If so, then steer clear of this next spot. The exact location of the place has been kept secret in order to keep vandals away, but it's in Spain, an abandoned doll factory. The place has been left untouched since the 80s. The factory produced porcelain dolls, often using real human hair, which only adds to how unsettling the atmosphere is here. The building itself is 3 stories tall. The floor in one wing has collapsed over the years, but there isn't much graffiti or signs of exploration. Again, the exact location has been kept secret, and that just makes the place feel even more empty and eerie. When the factory closed, it seems like everyone just vanished in the middle of their workday, leaving everything behind. There are boxes of doll parts, machinery, and half-finished dolls just laying on the assembly line. Yeah, it's freaky. Next up, we have another psychiatric hospital, Hellingly Hospital in East Sussex, England. The hospital opened in 1903 and had a reputation for its harsh treatments, including electroshock therapy and again lobotomies. It was originally built to ease the overcrowding at the Haywards Heath Asylum, but Hellingly ended up becoming overcrowded itself. Mainly because, again, you could find yourself locked away in a mental institution for pretty much anything back in the day. One of the most notorious treatments used here was electroconvulsive therapy. This would involve sending an electric current through the brain, inducing a brief seizure. The idea was that this electrical activity could reset the brain and help cure severe mental health issues. Now, aside from how painful this would be, patients could experience some pretty severe side effects like losing their memory, or some would even just end up in catatonic states. It was abandoned in 1994, and some of the people who investigate the place today claim they've encountered ghostly apparitions. The whole place is incredibly unsettling, seeing as it's an abandoned psychiatric hospital where many patients were horribly mistreated. One of the creepiest sections, though, has to be this one, the morgue, where the metal body trays have been left behind. Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky is said to be one of the most terrifying buildings in America, and it's not hard to see why. Construction began in 1908, and it finally opened in 1910 to treat, again, tuberculosis patients. Because of how contagious it was, patients were quarantined here. The sanatorium was built as a self-sufficient community with its own zip code, post office, and farmland. Doctors and staff were also required to stay on the grounds in order to prevent the spread of the disease. Waverly Hills closed in 1961, but reopened the following year as a nursing home. This phase lasted until about 1981 when it closed again. The property then sat abandoned for about 2 decades. Today, Waverly Hills is notorious for its ghost stories. Over 6,000 people are believed to have died here, so that's not all that surprising. This place is also infamous for its body chute, a tunnel that was used to discreetly transport corpses. Apparently, this is a hotspot for paranormal activity. Wonder why. Room 502 also gets a lot of activity. This room housed mentally ill tuberculosis patients, and a nurse was also said to have taken her life here. Next up, we have Letchworth Village in New York. The complex of over 130 buildings was constructed in 1911, a place to treat the mentally and physically ill. It was made to house around 2,000 patients, operating as a self-sufficient village. Patients tended farms, worked in shops, and lived in smaller, more personal dwellings, but just like with most of these places, it became overcrowded. Insufficient funding and staffing really didn't help either, so the intentions were good, but it didn't stay that way. Patients were often forgotten in this isolated community, and Letchworth also became known for using patients in clinical trials, especially when it came to the experimental polio vaccine in the 50s. The institution finally closed in 1996 after decades of reports of mistreatment and neglect. There's a small cemetery on the grounds with about 900 shallow graves, most who died very young, and because so many of the patients had no contact with their families, there aren't any names on their headstones, just numbers. Pennhurst State School and Hospital in Spring City, Pennsylvania was built in 1908, originally named the Eastern Estate Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. The institution soon became overcrowded, and for decades there was tons of controversy surrounding the place. Patients lived in harsh living conditions, forced labor was also a thing. A lot of the bad press started coming to light in the 60s and early 70s. The awful conditions were exposed in a series of investigative reports and lawsuits. The reports detailed the overcrowding, the unsanitary living conditions, and the neglect and mistreatment of the patients by the staff. In 1977, a lawsuit ruled that the conditions at Pennhurst violated patients' constitutional rights, but the place wouldn't close down until 1987. Riverview Hospital in Vancouver, Canada. The hospital opened in 1913 as the Esondale Hospital for the Insane. It was later renamed Riverview Hospital and became one of the largest mental health institutions in British Columbia. It had been built to help alleviate the overcrowding at other mental health facilities in the province. The facility included big gardens, greenhouses, and farms where patients could also work. Surprise, surprise, but overcrowding became a problem here too. The hospital's population peaked in the 50s with over 4,500 patients. Treatments like electroconvulsive therapy, insulin shock therapy, and lobotomies were also used. Things started to shift in the 60s and 70s though, with a focus on more community-based care. A lot of the patients were released into the community, but many of them didn't have good support systems in place and ended up living on the street. The hospital officially closed in 2012, and some of the buildings are still in use. Most of them have been left to decay though. With all that said, I've been your host James, and I will catch you, yes you specifically, in the next video.